What if you didn't love them? What if you only loved how they made you feel when you were lonely? When you spent a long time feeling unseen, even the smallest amount of attention can feel bigger than it is. Someone looks at you, they smile, they touch your arm, they remember something you said, and for a moment, it feels like a relief. Maybe the story you've believed your entire life might not be true. Maybe you're not invisible. Maybe you can be loved. But then that feeling starts pulling you toward them. You think about them, you replay the moment, you start imagining what it could mean. And before you know it, you might become attached, not to the person, but to the feeling that makes the loneliness stop. This is what happened to Denji, and what might be happening to you. So in this video, I'll talk about emotional hunger, projection, and how to tell whether you love this person, or you're just treating them as a solution. So the first point is when emotional hunger makes attention feel bigger than it is. Denji is emotionally starved. He longs for attention, meaning, and belonging. He's desperate for the comfort of someone who can feel that hollow ache within him. And if Denji had simply disappeared, maybe the world wouldn't notice, because attention had never been something stable in his life. It exists more as an unfulfilled fantasy than a lived reality. But then someone does give him attention, and for a moment, it feels like an escape from the narrative that has shaped his entire life. Maybe he doesn't have to die unseen. Maybe he can live being acknowledged. But this is where things start to shift, because the more starved we are for attention, the more we look for it in places where it might not exist. We might begin to inflate the meaning behind the smallest acts of kindness, because we are starving for even the tiniest glimpse of warmth. So we start chasing it, not the person, but the feeling they gave us. And what makes this even more compelling is that attention can feel euphoric when you are starved for it. A response can feel like reassurance. A smile can feel like walking on air. But what gives us this feeling of ecstasy can leave us feeling empty just as quickly. Because once the moment passes, the mind starts searching for meaning in the times when they stop paying attention. Are they not interested? Did I do something wrong? Am I unlovable? So we may start trying to earn their attention, hoping that it won't disappear. Because somewhere within us, it can start to feel like being loved is conditional. We might also idolize this person by putting them on a pedestal and viewing them as some perfect picture that we can only admire from afar. All the while, we might completely forget about our own life, our own aspirations, our own responsibilities, and even those who might genuinely care about us. Because we might believe this person is the answer to all of our suffering. And the more obsessed we become, the more we start changing ourselves to keep their attention. This leads into the second point of confusing love with projection. Denji idolizes Makima. In his mind, she is the embodiment of a perfect being, something to idolize and worship. Because it's not who she is that matters to Denji, but what she represents. Something that represents safety, warmth, and a reason to keep going. And perhaps an end to all the suffering that came before her. And maybe it's a way to romanticize how painful his life has been, and to finally be saved from it. This is what projection looks like. It's not seeing the person clearly, but attaching to what they symbolize within you. And you might be experiencing something similar. They put their hand on your shoulder. They leant forward when you spoke. They weren't turned off by your presence. So every surface level interaction suddenly becomes life-changing. So we might fantasize about them, replaying these moments in our head, trying to make sense of what it might mean. And when you are starved for love or attention, even the smallest gesture becomes something you might build meaning around. And slowly, without us realizing it, the person stops being seen clearly. So even when Denji is manipulated or disrespected, he doesn't fully step back. Because even negative attention can feel better than none. And at the same time, Denji doesn't take a step forward, because the rejection might shatter the illusion. Because sometimes we don't want an answer. Sometimes we may have been the one maintaining the distance. We don't want to ask them out. We don't want to ask how they feel about us. Because what if they reject us? What if they don't love us? So we may end up in limbo, too afraid to return to reality, where we feel invisible again, and too afraid to let go of the fantasy, because it feels like the only place where something might happen. So uncertainty becomes emotionally charged, because the less grounded the relationship is in reality, the more space there is for the fantasy. And at a certain point, it stops being about liking someone and starts becoming about regulating your emotional state through them. And if this happens, slowly your internal sense of worth might begin depending on external signals. So even neutral behavior can feel like rejection. A delay might leave you feeling anxious. A short message might create doubt. Not because our worries are necessarily true, but because our emotional state might be dependent on their behavior. And if you have spent your life feeling numb and in a constant state of indifference, then experiencing anything around somebody can feel more real than anything that came before it. But a momentary feeling is not the same as a lifelong bond, because sometimes we might mistake intimacy for desperation. So what is real love? Loving someone is not treating them as a perfect idol or treating them like a solution to your unmet needs. Love is wanting to get to know them and falling deeper into what you discover. Real love isn't built on emotional spikes, it's built on clarity. It's seeing someone as they are and wanting to be there for them on days when your needs aren't always met. Because when someone becomes the solution to your loneliness, you stop seeing someone separate from it. But real connection begins when the projection starts to fade. It's when you can hold two things at once. I feel something for this person, and I also see them for who they are. So a question you can ask yourself is, do I love this person, or do I love them giving me attention? There's nothing wrong with wanting attention, but if you replace this person with someone who can give you the same thing, then maybe it's not the person you were interested in the first place. That's why Denji likes people who like him, and why he's able to shift his attachment from Makima to Reze. Because sometimes it's not the person that matters, but the proposition they seem to offer. It doesn't mean that attention or projection doesn't exist in the presence of real love, because Reze and Denji did have real love. But because Denji never internalized his own self-worth, he was always being pulled externally by anything that can provide validation. It's attention and the possibility that drove him toward Reze, but it's love that got him to stay. And if you find yourself in a confusing situation, where you can't tell whether what you're feeling for someone is real, perhaps ask yourself, what happened that led you to develop feelings for this person? And at that time, what were those unmet needs? What makes emotional hunger so confusing is that it might be a solution to something that feels inadequate inside you. And if it's driven by loneliness, abandonment, or love having to be earned, we might believe that they can become the hope that replaces that void. Because when you have experienced a deep, aching pain for so long, we might want to believe that this person can rewrite the story that says I'm disposable. And sometimes what we call love is actually being seen, being chosen, and not feeling invisible anymore. And once you can recognize that unmet need beneath the attachment, you can begin separating the person from it. Because we may not be creating the space for love to exist if we continue being pulled by what that hidden attachment might offer. So if you've ever felt this emotional hunger, you know the feeling of always being pulled towards something that might make the loneliness stop. And when someone finally gives you attention, it can feel overwhelming, maybe even disorienting, because it touches on something that has been empty for a long time. But the important part is that you don't have to hide that. In a healthy connection, that doesn't have to make you unworthy. It's something you can be honest about with the right person that you can trust. It's something you can understand together, so you don't have to keep reaching for it alone. And in that kind of connection, both people are allowed to exist without erasing themselves. It's not about finding someone who can fulfill all your needs. It's finding someone you're willing to make sacrifices for and choosing to spend your worst days with. Because real love happens in the quiet moments, where you can spend your time doing nothing together and finding fulfillment in each other's presence. Real love is holding space for both people and having the willingness to change and to grow. And a healthy love can still include desire and excitement, but it doesn't distort your perception of the other person. It's less like saying, "You complete me," and more like saying, "I see you and I choose us." Because a desire is a wanting, but a love is a choice that stems from within. Maybe the hardest truth is this: sometimes what we experience as love is really the moment when we no longer felt invisible. And when you can understand the difference, You can start seeing people as they are, instead of the relief that they may temporarily give you. If you haven't seen the previous video, I talk about why attention feels like love when you're lonely. And if you want to see more, click this video here, where I talk about what happens when anxiety can stop us from connecting with others.